Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. The most dangerous weapon in France that morning wasn't in an armory. It was on the front page of a newspaper. On January 13, 1898, Parisians walking past newsstands stopped cold. The front page of L'Aurore carried a single headline in enormous black letters. J'accuse. Below it, in 4,000 words of controlled fury, France's most celebrated novelist accused the government, the military, and the courts of conspiring to destroy an innocent man, and he named names. Within hours, the newspaper had sold 300,000 copies. Within days, riots would erupt across France. Within weeks, the author would be convicted of criminal libel and forced to flee the country. And within a decade, the man he was trying to save would be completely exonerated. But on that January morning, none of that was certain. What was certain was that Émile Zola had just bet everything, his reputation, his fortune, his freedom, on a Jewish army captain he had never met. Picture this. It's a gray winter morning in Paris, and a 57-year-old man sits at his desk, surrounded by pages of handwritten notes. Émile Zola is the most famous writer in France, perhaps in the world. His 20-volume series, Les Rougon Macquart, has made him wealthy and celebrated. He has been made an officer of the Legion of Honor. His novels have been translated into dozens of languages. When he walks through Paris, people recognize him, and he is about to throw it all away. For months, Zola has been following a case that has divided France. The conviction of Captain Alfred Dreyfus for selling military secrets to Germany. The evidence against Dreyfus was flimsy from the start. A handwritten note, allegedly in his handwriting, listing French military documents, but Dreyfus was Jewish, and in the anti-Semitic atmosphere of 1890s France, that was evidence enough. Zola has seen the documents, he has talked to the investigators, he has read the transcripts, and he has become convinced not only that Dreyfus is innocent, but that the army knows he is innocent, and has been covering it up for 4 years while an innocent man rots in a tropical prison cell. The newspaper editor Georges Clemenceau, a future Prime Minister of France, has agreed to publish whatever Zola writes. The presses are waiting. All Zola has to do is put pen to paper. He knows what will happen when he does. French law makes it a crime to libel public officials. If he accuses the generals by name, they will prosecute him. He could go to prison. He will certainly be ruined socially. The establishment that has celebrated him for decades will turn on him overnight. Now he picks up his pen and begins, "I accuse Lieutenant Colonel Dupaty de Clam of having been the diabolical agent of the miscarriage of justice. Let me build the clock for you." Because the Dreyfus affair didn't begin with Zola's letter. It began 4 years earlier with a cleaning woman and a wastebasket. In September 1894, a French spy working as a cleaning woman in the German embassy in Paris retrieved a torn document from a wastebasket. It was a handwritten note, what the French called a bordereau, listing French military secrets that someone was offering to sell to Germany. The hunt for the traitor began. Suspicion quickly fell on Captain Alfred Dreyfus, a 35-year-old artillery officer on the Army's general staff. He was brilliant ambitious, wealthy, and he was the only Jew on the general staff. When handwriting experts offered conflicting opinions about whether the bordereau was in his hand, the army arrested him anyway. What happened next was a travesty. Dreyfus was tried by court-martial in secret. The judges were shown a secret dossier of evidence that Dreyfus and his lawyers were never allowed to see. On December 22, 1894, he was convicted of treason and sentenced to life imprisonment on Devil's Island, a brutal penal colony off the coast of French Guiana, where prisoners died of fever, isolation, and despair. On January 5, 1895, Dreyfus was publicly degraded in a ceremony designed to humiliate him. In the courtyard of the École Militaire, before 4,000 soldiers and a jeering crowd, an officer stripped the buttons and insignia from his uniform and broke his sword over his knee. Dreyfus stood at attention and shouted, "I am innocent! Long live France!" The crowd shouted back, "Death to the Jew!" That should have been the end of it. Dreyfus was shipped to Devil's Island, placed in solitary confinement, forbidden to speak to his guards. His legs were shackled to his bed at night. The case was closed, except it wasn't. In 1896, a new chief of Army intelligence, Lieutenant Colonel Georges Picquart, made a troubling discovery. Another torn document had been retrieved from the German embassy, and this one pointed to a different officer entirely. Major Ferdinand Volsing Esterhazy, a dissolute aristocrat with gambling debts and a known hatred of France. Picquart compared handwriting samples. The bordereau that had convicted Dreyfus was written by Esterhazy. Dreyfus was innocent. Picquart brought his findings to his superiors. Their response was not what he expected. Instead of reopening the case, they transferred Picquart to Tunisia, essentially exiling him. The army had no intention of admitting it had convicted the wrong man, but the truth has a way of leaking out. Dreyfus's brother, Mathieu, hired investigators. Journalists began asking questions, and in January 1898, when Esterhazy was finally court-martialed, in what everyone understood to be a sham trial designed to silence the rumors, he was acquitted in 3 minutes. 3 minutes. The judges didn't even pretend to deliberate. It was then that Zola decided to act. He had been following the case for months, growing more outraged with each revelation. Now he understood that the army would never correct its mistake voluntarily. Someone would have to force them. His weapon would be the law itself. Zola's letter was not a general condemnation. It was a series of specific accusations against specific individuals, accusations that were, under French law, criminally libelous. He accused the handwriting experts of fraud. He accused the generals of conspiracy. He accused the court-martial of following illegal orders. He accused the War Ministry of waging an abominable press campaign to mislead the public. Each accusation began with the same 2 words, j'accuse, I accuse. The repetition was deliberate, building to a crescendo of moral outrage that readers found impossible to ignore. He did this deliberately. Zola wanted to be prosecuted. A libel trial would create a public forum where the evidence of Dreyfus's innocence, evidence the army had been suppressing for years, would finally have to be presented in open court. It was a brilliant strategy. It was also incredibly dangerous. Zola was not a lawyer or a politician. He was a novelist. He had no protection, no immunity, no allies in the government. He was betting that the truth, once exposed, would be powerful enough to save both Dreyfus and himself. The reaction was immediate and violent. Anti-Semitic mobs rioted in Paris and across France. In Algeria, Jewish shops were looted and synagogues attacked. Zola received thousands of letters, some praising his courage, others threatening his life. On February 7, 1898, Zola went on trial. The proceedings lasted 2 weeks and became a national spectacle. But the army had anticipated Zola's strategy. The judges ruled that the defense could not introduce evidence about Dreyfus's innocence, only about whether Zola had committed libel. Zola was convicted on February 23rd and sentenced to a year in prison and a fine of 3,000 francs. Facing imprisonment, he fled to England, where he lived in exile for 11 months. But his gamble had worked. The trial had exposed the army's cover-up to international scrutiny. Pressure mounted. In 1899, Dreyfus was brought back from Devil's Island for a new court-martial. Incredibly, he was convicted again, but this time with extenuating circumstances. The new president of France, Émile Zola, pardoned him 10 days later. Complete exoneration would take 7 more years. In 1906, the French Supreme Court finally annulled Dreyfus's conviction entirely. He was reinstated in the army, promoted to major, and awarded the Legion of Honor. Zola had died 4 years earlier. Some suspected he was murdered by anti-Semitic enemies who blocked his chimney, causing him to die of carbon monoxide poisoning. However, it was officially ruled an accident. Dreyfus served France faithfully in World War I and died in 1935. By then, the affair that bore his name had become a turning point in European history, a moment when the forces of justice and bigotry collided in public view, and justice eventually prevailed. The Dreyfus affair gave us the word intellectual, coined during the crisis to describe the writers, scientists, and academics who rallied to Dreyfus's defense. It demonstrated that a single voice, armed with nothing but the truth and a printing press, could challenge the most powerful institutions in a nation. But it also showed something darker. The affair revealed how easily anti-Semitism or any form of scapegoating could infect a justice system. Dreyfus was convicted not because the evidence pointed to him, but because he was convenient. He was different. He was the outsider who could be blamed. Theodor Herzl, a journalist covering the Dreyfus trial for a Vienna newspaper, watched the mobs in Paris, chanting "Death to the Jews," and drew a conclusion that would reshape the 20th century. If anti-Semitism could flourish in France, the birthplace of liberty, equality, and fraternity, then Jews would never be safe in Europe. They needed their own homeland. The modern Zionist movement was born in the shadow of the Dreyfus affair. And then there is the question that still echoes. What does it cost to speak truth to power? Zola knew he would be prosecuted. He knew he might go to prison. He knew he was risking everything he had built over a lifetime. He did it anyway. "The truth is on the march," Zola wrote during the affair, "and nothing will stop it." In his letter, Zola wrote, "When truth is buried underground, it grows, it chokes. It gathers such an explosive force that on the day it bursts out, it blows up everything with it." Those words capture something essential about what happened on January 13, 1898. The army had buried the truth about Dreyfus for 4 years. They had exiled the officer who discovered it, protected the man who committed the crime, and imprisoned an innocent man on a remote island where they hoped he would be forgotten. But truth, as Zola understood, is not so easily contained. It leaks through the cracks. It finds allies in unexpected places. And when it finally explodes into the open, the institutions that tried to suppress it are often destroyed by the blast. The French army thought it was protecting its honor by covering up its mistake. In the end, the cover-up did more damage to its reputation than the original error ever could have. These are the facts. On January 13, 1898, Émile Zola published an open letter accusing the French military of framing an innocent man for treason. Captain Alfred Dreyfus had been convicted on forged evidence, subjected to public humiliation, and imprisoned in solitary confinement on Devil's Island for a crime he did not commit. The real traitor, Major Esterhazy, had been acquitted in a sham trial designed to protect the Army's reputation. These are also facts. Zola was convicted of libel and fled to England, but his letter forced the truth into the open. Dreyfus was eventually pardoned, then fully exonerated. The affair became a defining moment in the history of civil liberties, journalism, and the fight against anti-Semitism. And this is the consequence we still live with. The question of moral courage has no easy answer. Zola risked everything for a man he had never met, because he believed that justice matters more than convenience, and truth matters more than reputation. What would you have done? I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, consider this. Zola didn't know if his gamble would work. He didn't know if anyone would listen or if he would spend years in prison for nothing. He only knew that staying silent was no longer something he could live with. Sometimes that's all any of us can know. Thank you for spending these few minutes with me. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. And if you have a moment, leaving a rating or a comment means more than you might realize. It helps other history lovers find us. And honestly, I read every single one. If this episode made you think, share it with someone who might appreciate it too. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.